I think being patient is quite important. So founders particularly being patient, because making rapid decisions is what has got them where they've got to, and that is what a scale up that's what a startup looks like.
Right.
Learn to trade risk well and fast, and that's what makes them brilliant decision makers. They have a huge breadth of their organization, but they get to a point where actually you need the depth as well.
Right.
And depth takes time, so you have to allow people a bit of time.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform. I am delighted to be joined today by an old university friend. I was thinking about this morning. I think it's been 27 years almost since we first met back up in Durham, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show today. We have founder at Scale Up Consulting, also doing a huge amount of work in the non-exec space, and ex-Skyscanner C-suite, which is easier to write down than it is to say. Welcome to the show today, Shane Corstorphine.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure, mate. And it's been great to catch up over the last sort of few weeks and months as well in preparation for this. And, you know, as I say, you know, we know each other from back in those days at doing engineering back in Durham Uni those days. And we've done various different things between ourselves in those years. But tell us about your journey. What got you to where you are today?
And Paul, I'd like to say that you clearly haven't been stressed enough, because you've barely changed in those 27 years.
A couple of grey hairs here and there, mate.
I've had a slight. People seem to think I've had a bit of a tough paper round. So what have I been doing since? Well, we enjoyed our sort of master's in engineering world, which is it's an amazing grounding. I think particularly in how you solve problems, and how you think about. It's amazing. The book we read, The Goal, is now in most of the tech companies I work with,
right?
And it's all about a sort of degree of just in time, and also like sort of identifying constraints, reducing to the constraints. So it's sort of theory of constraints analysis, TOC stuff. So a brilliant grounding. Then went off, became an accountant, started my first kind of tech or e-commerce company whilst training with PwC. Ran that for a period of time, and became the second biggest male grooming e-commerce site in the UK. But at the same time, I was getting married, and actually I began to get a bit stressed that I needed to go and have I guess a more consistent job.
Right.
Moved into leverage finance in London, caught all the boom years on that up to 2008, then moved back to Scotland, and then moved into a sort of COO role,
right,
sort of head of business management role with Barclays, and back on a plane to London doing that. And it was about 2,000 people, 2 billion turnover sort of number, Barclays corporate. And then an interesting business came in looking for debt. The guys in the leverage finance team said, look, you understand this space, you used to do leverage finance, what do you think? And I think my view was, don't touch some of the barge pole. And then another friend said they are looking for a CFO. They're growing quite fast. They're like 30 people. Do you want to have a chat? And I was continuing to mentor startups through the Princess Trust. I've always done that. I've always been involved with sort of like e-commerce-y type companies, even ever since sort of selling mine on. So I did, and a long journey started, but eventually ended up with me moving to a company called Skyscanner.
Right.
Which was great. It was a hell of a journey. It's funny now. I look, and we'll chat about this later, I'm sure. But I look, when I'm working with clients, I talk about kind of like operational excellence, and there's some underlying foundations that you have to have as well. But broadly, you've got people, strategy, and delivery.
Right.
And actually, I look at the three of us that drove that sat at the top of that organization. And we had Gareth, one of the original founders, The other two founders had sort of were stepping away as I joined when we were about 50 people, 50 to 80 people, I think, by the time. And then, so we had one very focused on long-term strategy, one very focused on people. And I suspect I was given my focus on numbers and execution and obsession with it, probably quite firmly on the delivery side.
Right.
Not the engineering delivery side. I think we were all sort of all over that, but just in terms of numbers, KPIs, moving the business forward and execution. And that was a magical journey and involved me doing 4 years as CFO. For a while, I held the title as having done the biggest private tech raise in the UK, and then Deliveroo trumped me not much later when I raised 200 million pounds at $1 billion. And then I moved to Miami to run growth, globally growth, and it was about 400 people in that org by that point. And that was magical. It's a real head scratcher. We were doing a base of 20 billion ticket value at that point, and how do you grow 20 billion? And we were malcontent, so really anything under 50% growth was always disappointing. So how do you take 20 billion and grow at 50% across 200 markets, 30 languages? I always loved that multi-market kind of localization head scratcher.
Right.
And we did, we built a phenomenal business. And then sold it to a company called Ctrip,
right?
Now Trip.com. And they bought it for $1.8 billion in 2016.
Wow.
Quite a while ago now, 8 years ago now. Wow.
Fantastic.
And so I stayed there for a while. I stayed there till the end of 2019, and actually I was genuinely exhausted at that point. I was losing my memory quite a lot, and I just I'd fallen out of love with business, to be honest. So took a bit of time out. Started mentoring a couple of scale-ups. That then moved to sort of starting to fall back in love with business. Took on non-exec role with a company called Simple Online Pharmacy.
Right.
Oh, in the meantime, I also retrained as a cabinet maker.
I was going to mention that at some point.
Actually. Yeah, that was magical. I loved that. It was a forced downtime that was needed.
Yeah.
Simple Online Pharmacy, fantastic business, Glasgow based, but kind of UK online, growing incredibly quickly. I love working with them, and then was lucky enough to join the board of Sykes, which is like the other end of the spectrum, and it's sort of over 1,000 people. The biggest now, the biggest book of cottages in the UK. If you want to rent a property, that's probably who you'll go through, one of their brands. And that's been magic. And they've got a big team growing fast and incredibly good on execution.
Right.
And then I've become chairman of a company called X Design, which is a kind of digital transformation agency, I would say. So they are largely engineering based, but they do have a design function as well.
Okay.
And work with a whole range of clients. So if you have an area that you want to double down your engineering investment in, you can fire up 2 or 3 squads from X Design very quickly,
right?
Who have all worked together probably for quite a long time, multidisciplinary squad, and allow you to put some weight in behind. Whereas if you think of the time it takes to hire a multidisciplinary squad, you could be looking at first engineer to 6th engineer, 12 months. Then they've got to get used to working together, how your product owner works, daily stand-ups, all that sort of rigor. So they'll do that. You pay a premium for that. But actually, if you think of, you don't have to worry about management, don't have to, you've got somebody you could put a bit of pressure on now because they were outsourcing to them. They're working with your in-house teams alongside it. So you're keeping all your IP and knowledge there. I think they are brilliantly positioned as we come out of this dip when people have laid off a lot of full-time engineers to really grow incredibly fast. And they're already 500 people. I mean, they're not an insignificant business by any means. So chairman there, and then I've just taken on a 4th and final non-exec role in a big data travel sort of data company that's super exciting, and it's kind of going on a bit of a shift in the journey. It's just done a big acquisition. Again, private equity backed. So really enjoying working with them. We just haven't announced it yet, so I'll keep that mystical. And then the other side of my business is I have a one-man consultancy, which and it feeds my desire to help people be the best they can be, and I coach CEOs. I coach founders to become CEOs is probably the best way to put it. And I coach CEOs through that scale-up journey. When they're growing very fast, the business is changing the whole time. They may or may not have an exec team that can support them. They may or may not have the right sort of board that can support them.
Right.
And it's pretty lonely, to be honest. And therefore, having somebody you can bounce ideas, somebody you can be honest with and say, I have no idea how to solve this problem.
Right.
I think helps them be the best they can be, and in turn helps those organizations be the best that they can be. So I have a real passion there, and I keep it to a relatively few clients there, so I can give them the time that they need.
Brilliant stuff.
And that's largely done out of passion.
Yeah. Oh, mate, I mean, there's so much in there just to unpack just from the history. And I know people are going to be very interested, certainly in the Skyscanner bit. It's a household brand and something that I've used many, many times over the years. If I'd known I was putting money in your pocket, I might have done something different. But particularly after the England-Scotland result over the weekend, but we won't talk about that.
I said we wouldn't talk about
it. So, I mean, that was such an amazing journey to go from, a startup, and you said about 30 people when you joined, through to how many people and what sort of size was it when you eventually?
Yeah, we would have been over 50 when I joined, but it was sort of single office. Right. And we ended up with, I think, 12 offices and about 2,000 people.
Right.
And it was a massive transformation.
Yeah.
Hugely, on the one side, hugely lucky in that the product was outstanding.
Yep.
And therefore this wasn't about professionalizing and putting lipstick on a pig. It was an existing phenomenal product with an organization that had sort of capped out and therefore had what I now see the whole time is all the challenges of a startup kind of going through puberty and becoming a scale up.
Right.
And that was the first time I'd seen it, really. But it thankfully it wasn't the first time that Mark Logan, who joined as COO the same day as me, had seen it. And he was a brilliant mentor, and I still stay in touch with him. And when I talk about that people part, that would have been Mark.
Right.
I guess the delivery and numbers and actually metrics and being able to measure our performance probably sat with me, as did funding and so it's sort of, I guess it's and then the sort of long-term visionary was Gareth Williams, who was the sort of original founder of it. So
I mean, I think that's so important on a couple of points, really. One is to have that structure in your business, to have a focus, but an ability to bounce things off each other, where you've each got a focused area, but it's complementary to the others. But you can challenge each other, you can bounce those ideas off each other, and you can be inspired by what the others bring. And the other bit I want to cover off as well is, because I spoke to another one of the guests, Tom Cliff, a while back on this, is that the value of having somebody who has gone through that process before. And I guess this is where certainly the scale-up consulting comes through, is that for many people, that scale-up journey is probably a once-in-a-lifetime piece that they've never done before and maybe never will again. So to have somebody who's been through it, learnt the lessons, understood what's gone on, is that where you see the value in certainly the consulting side that you do?
Yeah, hugely, and it's where I see, for me, it's where I get my energy from, my enjoyment from, in terms of I can see the impact it has. There is founders have often barely survived getting to their point of scale up,
right?
And therefore they have entrenched in them a set of behaviors that are entirely natural, and yet feel like they're clashing with some parts of their org.
Right.
And so almost a lot of what I do is helping people be at peace and being able to empathize with why we are where we are, and tell people this is super normal,
Right.
And then the second thing is, this is how we find a way through it.
Right. So all that energy that people are having on, is this normal? Is that, am I an outlier here? You can take that stress away from them to, and take those thoughts away so they can focus their mindset on what they need to do to grow and scale that business. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'll try and do it quite kind of consistently, not too frequently. People need time to execute. But it's a bit like seeing a personal trainer as well, right? It's everyone reverts at some point. Massive stress comes in, whatever it is, and so suddenly you will see founder 90% journey to CEO suddenly reverting back,
Right.
and going really deep, or dropping one in below, thinking they're helping this person but actually completely undermining that person below them. And you'll see that sort of ad hoc kind of rapid firefighting behavior revert completely normally. And then it's just about gently going, right, okay, we've acknowledged it, we know why you're trying to do it, this is what went well, what didn't go well, let's work through that.
Right.
So it's complicated, and I think it's lonely, and I think it's really important to have somebody who just works with you over a long period of time with a high degree of trust.
Yeah.
To help people, to help founders particularly go on that journey.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. I think the value that's, as I say, someone who's been through that process can bring, but also you mentioned the trusted advisor piece. How do you have a particular way in which you go about generating and developing that trust, or is it just your general approach that goes and gets those results?
Yeah, I don't specifically. Nearly all my work is referral, so it kind of comes in with and it's a bit like a sort of dating process in terms of, for me, I will want to have 2 or 3 sessions as well,
right,
before we're kind of into any sort of formality. It's yeah, so I think it builds quite quickly. You've got a high degree of empathy, and it's brutal, right? I mean it is, being a founder going through a scale up is incredibly tough. And I think having a sort of wingman, somebody you can bounce ideas off, quite quickly develops a higher level of trust, as it does going on the rugby field, or going to war together. When you go in at that massive sort of what is almost like a physical battle, and a grind, and it's tiring and exhausting, having somebody that you can rely on is really important.
Yeah.
So I think it develops over time. And it goes both ways, right?
Right.
So there's the issue where I struggle is when the trust goes the other way and breaks, which is, so I genuinely believe there are many ways to skin a cat. So I can now say, I've seen this 3 times, and you're right, most people can't say they've seen it at all.
Right.
Very few people can say I've seen it once. And I can say, look, I've seen this 2 or 3 times. Here is the landmines I would avoid, but there's 2 or 3 ways to do it. This is probably the route I would take.
Right.
But there are many ways to skin a cat. I have no problem if that person then says, I entirely disagree.
Right.
And I hear what you say, but actually I've been living and breathing this for 15 years. Like, I know it. And I'm like, you so do. You have the deep domain, I have the breadth. We're gonna do it this way. Where I find it, I struggle, and this is one of my problems of the execution obsessive side, is I might coach out of somebody, like, where are we trying to get to, right? I mean, you're just head down, you're pounding away, but what is the, so we'll work through, we'll go right back to where they started the company, and we'll kind of what is the purpose? Let's get that, so we can really communicate that. Why should somebody come and work for you? Why do we exist? What is the, and then we'll work out what is a reasonable 3 to 5 year vision. And I'll say vision because it'll be highly tangible and measurable. Purpose tends to be evergreen and intangible, or hard. and then we'll put some pillars in behind it. And broadly, you outline here the 5 steps that we just need to work through next over the next 18 months if we're going to hit this goal in 5 years' time. And in doing that, you're being very clear about this is what we are there for. By saying we are consciously going to do these 4 or 5 things, we are saying we are not going to do right now these other 6 or 7 things, right? It's so a very critical. Conscious, we're not doing this. And I can then turn up and meet with that person, a month later, 3 weeks later, and coach out them kids. The first base looks like this. So you have got to get this done before you can get to 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. 100%. Okay. So you meet them 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, and you say, how are you getting on? And they say, well, I've been thinking about third base. And I don't think it's quite right. Okay, well, it's going to be directional. I know fine well that stuff will change anyway as we work through the chapters of the book. It'll tweak, it'll amend, but I'm at peace with that. And I understand some people aren't at peace with that. They need it to be almost perfect.
Right.
But you say, okay, but how's first base coming on? I haven't got there yet. I haven't got there. You then meet 3 weeks later again, and you say, how are you getting on? How are you getting that? And it tends to be people. Most of what I do is tech. There's very few assets. It's people. Right. It tends to be like fixing a people problem, people team, building a platform, whatever it might be. How are you getting on with first base? And I say, well, I've been thinking about fifth base and this. And actually, I just sort of gently move away from them. Because I can't. I charge my time because I think people then respect it more, and actually it means I don't get sort of frustrated getting dragged in for meetings and stuff, because I'm like, actually this is getting paid well for this. I tend to operate only in 20 million turnover and up companies, and roughly 50 people. Right. So they've got the right sorts of problem, but they've got the funding to be able to fix this stuff. Yeah. So they can fix it. But I'm not a babysitter. Yeah. And like if you coach out and somebody knows what they've got to do and they still can't do it. And if I was an investor, I would almost take this route, get to know like that long dating process, and then really get a feel for where you'd invest and where you wouldn't invest, because execution is much rarer than people realize it is. Right. And there are definitely founders in sort of decent sized businesses who I think have been really good on the strategy and vision side, have been able to talk a great talk in terms of recruiting people, and have probably hired a great number 2 ops person. But because that ops person is learning from a founder that may not have the operational skills, they eventually cap out. Right. And they're kind of going on literally first principles of just getting stuff done. But actually you need a whole bunch of other tools than I can just get stuff done and write lists and execute, because you burn out. Like, you just can't pedal faster. You have to have other gears to go through. And they're learning off this individual who probably is the right visionary and all the rest of it. But actually, if they're scatty or they can't communicate, or they can't manage or set objectives for this person eventually caps out. Right. And that is probably where that business will peak. Right. And that's fine. But it's where it will peak. And that's not my where I'm at. Right. I like to build businesses that have massive ambition. I want to be really big, and teams that want to execute, and build the best they can do, and have a degree of focus. So, and that's rare. And it's taken me a long time to sort of sift through, I guess, and find the clients I have now. Yep. And they're really fantastic, and I genuinely look forward to every session I have with them. And it's usually rewarding, because we'll coach something out of them, and then 4 weeks later they'll be like, we've done it, we've seen this. Or 6 months later they'll be like, we're now seeing the impact come through of the foundations we laid back here. So yeah, I can't remember where your question started.
No, I mean, there's so many learnings from that, both in terms of the structure that you've got to have, the people you've got, but I think from a practitioner perspective, even from the coaching side and the consulting side, knowing who your client, who you work best with, who gets you out of bed in the morning and excited about what you do, and being able to identify when to step away from those things. For any person in this industry, no matter what scale you are, maybe your thing is to help people up to their cap level. Maybe that's what gives you the excitement in terms of what you do, but maybe it's gone beyond that, or maybe it's something completely different. But finding that thing that excites you is going to make you a better performer ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think that in turn helps the people you're helping to be as best they can be.
It does. It's a compromise though, because my strengths and my skill set and my knowledge all operate in that 50 people and up space, I would say.
Right.
20 million, start to build a C-suite. I've got a few grown-ups around the table, may have a VC in, maybe not. That sort of level. Whereas there's nothing I love more than, like, if I'm sitting at dinner or whatever else, chatting to some proper startup,
Right.
because I love, I love this sort of excitement of the startup-y type stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm now too, it sounds grim to say, sort of professionalized. I'm too scale orientated,
right,
to be able to be any more useful than your average guy in a pub of
right.
like, I like pink or I like blue, whatever, at that level. And therefore they say, it'd be really useful to have a chat. And I'm like, I'm no good to you, actually. I get tons of energy out of that area, and I love hearing those ideas, but I'm absolutely zero use to them broadly, other than saying, great job, well done, stick at it, which anyone can do. Their mum can do that. Whereas the bigger space does give me, I guess, energy as well, but I have much more leverage of my ability to kind of have an impact, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that comes on nicely to a question I'll ask all my guests around what helps you perform at your best. What are the things that you do that keep you at your peak and keep challenging you to be better?
I mean, I think that's a brilliant question. Like time, over time, I mean space is really important. I operated, including Zoom. I mean, I had 13-hour time difference in me based in Miami and my team in Beijing, and so I would start Zoom at 5:36 in the morning,
right?
And I could have up to 19 meetings a day and kind of get handed a sandwich on the way in,
right?
With my PA, and just like dish, dish, dish. And that's one of the problems when you scale, is your senior team becomes a massive bottleneck. And actually, there is only so much you can do. At some point, there are creaking points where you're always going to be just consumed by it. Right. That's just you can't perfectly time when somebody leaves, when you recruit somebody, when you're pushing out a process. And now I really value headspace and time to be able to think about my clients, and think about how I can help them. I always ask them to send me an agenda the day before the meeting.
Okay.
And it will tend to be, depending on where the relationship is, we'll be working through the chapters, like not literally the chapters of a book. Everything is bespoke because every company is different, and actually every CEO and founder are different. But you'll be sort of working through how to get to the sort of next state in a kind of consistent way. But there will be a 40%, which is like, this platform's on fire. Can I just run it past you? Can we have a chat about it? I just need to bounce it with somebody. So that's why I love the agenda. It's like, but get us the day before. So when I go out and go for a walk, whatever, I can think about it. I can think about experiences I've had. I can think about comparable models. So I think time and planning are absolutely great. I do not have a magic wand at all. I can nudge and I can coach, and you move from kind of coaching, you've got directing, you've got prescribing, and I will flip back and forwards depending on the need of the client.
Right.
I am not a straight up coach. And there are a lot of coaches who are much better than me, but I have probably more empathy for scale up CEOs than most coaches, because I've been there,
Yeah.
and I've been there now quite a lot, and I can do the directing piece if I have to, because that's, I guess, one of the skills that I've learned is how to be very prescriptive, but in a like prescribed framework. Within that, do whatever you like.
Right.
Just don't step outside these boundaries, please, because that's massive risk, and this is super low risk. And
Right. You can play in
so,
this
and
space, but outside of that, it starts getting dangerous, and that's where
yeah,
that's where you're
yeah.
likely
So
to slip up.
whatever it might be, whatever's sort of needed at that point in time, is kind of how I'll flip between those roles.
Right.
But I need coming back to your question, I need headspace and time to flip into those roles, to think about it. I have a bunch of like proprietary materials as well and slides that I will use to bring something to life, and they might help influence somebody on something.
So is that maybe where some of the things like the woodworking element came in, learning that carpentry and cabinetry making side, something to allow you to have that space and to have that headspace to not think about the business bit and almost reignite your love for it and your passion for it by not thinking about it and stepping away from it. Is that something that rings true to you?
Paul, you're dead right. So I didn't know that at the time.
Right.
There's a couple of things, um, I think we are built, particularly in these scale-ups, to treat things like a race, right? Where there's a finish line. And one of the really hardest things is the finish line moves quite often.
Right.
And if you can imagine if you're running, I have to confess, I've never run a marathon. Have you run a marathon?
I ate one once, but I think they call them Snickers these days. So
yeah. Okay, yeah. So if you've got to run a marathon and then 200 meters from the line, or even a mile from the line, somebody says, "Oh, we're going to whack another half on."
Right.
You've probably not managed your energy levels, and it's very hard for us to mentally think, I just need to run in perpetuity and be at peace with that.
Right.
So I think a lot of what you see in scale ups is people put these sort of rather than calling it a milestone, they put a finish line in place.
Right.
And rather than realizing they're building a kind of living, breathing organism that will last well beyond them, should last well beyond them, founders, CFOs, whatever role, COO. And there'll be a series of events and milestones on that journey, but that business just needs to go and go and go. And there'll be some people who join near the next milestone, they last another 4 milestones, and some who join at the start. And it's kind of living, breathing thing. There is a definite, and particularly in the kind of scale up space, is a finish line, got to go. And the finish line perpetually moves. And so, unless you manage your energy levels appropriately, you will at some point come to a headache. You're not young anymore after a decade of doing that stuff, and I was a decade in leverage finance before. You can't just throw everything at it, and you can't just pedal harder and whatever else. So I didn't realize that at the time, and would treat life as like work hard, rest hard, as opposed to trying to get the balance between the two, which I think is very hard to do. And therefore mine was the sort of enforced rest. But I also thought I'd hit the finish line and that was it. I'm done with business. I'm just going to enjoy life and do interesting projects now, and maybe some stuff, but not much. And so it was kind of a thank you to myself to recognize what I'd been through, I think.
Right.
Just something to say, okay, this is incredibly gratuitous. I'm never going to do this for a career. It's quite an expensive course.
Right.
It's just for me. But I'm going to do it. And that created a sort of peace and a sort of removed any sort of last frustrations around about what ifs or anything that we've all got from various stages of our lives, and so it was incredibly healing, but that wasn't the intention. I thought that was me just done. Like I thought I'll do this and I might woodwork for the rest of my life, and I was learning to fly. Broadly, I was working my way through a midlife crisis list, just ticking stuff off. And I ticked a lot of them off, and I really enjoyed them, and I became a much more interesting person, I think, as a result. I have a lot of kind of random interests now. But my woodworking skills will never go through the accelerated, intense learning that my business skills have. I've always operated in accelerated learning environments, whether that's kind of in London and working all through the day and through the night when deals, and sort of meeting my wife for lunch the next day and saying, sorry, I didn't come home at all last night,
Right.
to that kind of scale up to flying all over the world to, it was kind of all encompassing. And that has a compound effect.
Right.
If you operate in an accelerated learning environment, you build experience and knowledge. And I remember a graduate once saying to me, I'm from the generation of work smarter. It's like, I'm all over work smarter, but until you've got experience, you have no idea what smart is. And that is just volume, actually. A lot of that is just volume of experience. So, and I'll never have that in woodworking.
Yeah.
I just can't see myself turning bowls
I've
12 hours a day for the rest of my life.
I had a great coach once when I was living and working in New Zealand who was chatting to me about what I want to do. We were looking about a career move. And I've always loved cooking. And he was challenging me. He was like, so is this something you want to take as a career? And really got me thinking about it in terms of, is that something that I want to go into? And the sort of reflection for me was, no, I want to use this as my ability to stand back and not have the pressure. And if I made it into my career, it would take away all the joy. And so I think it's finding those things that balance you out and give you the freedom to either express yourself or do the things that aren't linked to what you're doing in your day-to-day business world as well. There's some great opportunities there.
Yeah, no, I entirely agree.
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I'll ask all my guests as well, in terms of if you could use your skill set and your experience, as vast as it is over the years, to help any individual or team or organization, who would you want that to be?
So I am pushing quite hard on this one, actually, as it is. So it's Scotland, full stop.
Okay.
And I don't think I could ever be a politician, but there are certainly areas that I can help in. And I've just spent the last year on the Scottish Investment Panel, which is looking at how do we raise 100 billion into Scotland to drive to net zero, which is not a straightforward task. And we had a series of proposals that came out. And the area that I am now keen to help develop and shape is in that I guess 2 to 20 million funding space. We have Scottish Enterprise here. We have an incredibly healthy angel network.
Right.
But it's above that. I think there's a gap and there's a lack of strategy, lack of cohesive strategy, and there's some very odd. The way that politics works is very odd in terms of the unintended consequences of things.
Right.
And this is not just a kind of Scottish government thing. This is a Westminster thing. The whole thing is clunky as hell. And so I am trying to get a mandate to roll my sleeves up and pull a team together and then do a load of deep dives and come back with a small set of proposals that we think could really streamline and enhance that part of the economy in Scotland.
Oh, brilliant. Well, if we've got anybody listening who can help out and get involved, then
sure.
that's definitely something to be passionate about. I know you've always been passionate about Scotland, and it doesn't surprise me that you're saying that in a lot of ways, to be honest, but that's great to hear. So maybe let's flip that on its head a little bit and say, if you could sit down, have a meal, have a drink with somebody who you think could really help up your game and help you perform at your best, who would you want that to be?
Yeah, so that is a super interesting question. It's I think I think about that sort of people, strategy, and delivery piece, and in terms of business, and I've always been quite an open person. I've been lucky that I could absorb information from people because I will tell them what is worrying me or frustrating me rather than sort of block it in. And so this journey I've been on recently, I've had a sort of ton of help from people in terms of actually how to deal with not being a 100-hour week kind of person.
Right.
kind of going back to the business piece, because that is where my passion is, I think, where my heart is. I was lucky. I worked with a guy called Mark Logan, who's now Chief Entrepreneurial Officer for Scotland.
Wow.
And he was our COO, and I learned a ton off him on the people side.
Mm.
I am naturally an executor, operator, numbers, metrics type guy. And actually, I am also a dreamer. So I exist right out on that strategy, 3 to 5. My Scotland goal is like a 2050 goal. Like I
Right.
love being way out,
Right.
but I'm also nuts and bolts execution, 100-day plan. One of the people I love though is Simon Sinek on the people side. He disrupts my thinking. You know, I highly influenced by kind of corporate life when I had that part of my career. A lot that unpicked by Mark Logan, which is brilliant in terms of how to really enable people and communicate and give people agency and help them to be the best they can be.
Yeah.
But occasionally I revert, like anyone does, right? I revert back to let's just get this done. And therefore I think I'd learn a huge amount, or I'd be challenged a huge amount by going for a pint with Simon Sinek on stuff, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's an amazing answer, one for the individual, but also for the thinking in terms of where's the gap for me, where's the risk, and who can I learn from to be the better version of myself, and sort of make sure I don't trip up in those areas. I mean, absolutely amazing chatting as always, Shane. And I just wanted to maybe close out a little bit with, if you were to, let's focus on the scale up bit. If you were to give 1 or 2 bits of advice that you think are key for people going through that scale up journey, what would that be?
Well, that 1 or 2 bits is quite difficult. I think being patient is quite important. So founders particularly being patient, because making rapid decisions is what has got them where they've got to, and that is what a scale up looks. That's what a startup looks like.
Right.
Learn to trade risk well and fast, and that's what makes them brilliant decision makers. They have a huge breadth of their organization, but they get to a point where actually you need the depth as well.
Right.
And depth takes time, so you have to allow people a bit of time. So I would say kind of, I guess, hire well and be patient would be 2 really important things. And just to sort of slightly bring that to life, I think hiring well means hiring people who are good managers and actually can cope with probably not being managed very well, because you're possibly not a great manager as a founder. You're a great leader, but not a great manager. And that has massive downsides at times. Setting objectives, direction, being clear, giving people agency. But I think if you can be patient and you can hire well, then you'll do very well. The other bit of the patience is, at some point, that strength of quick, fleet of foot and changing direction. You know, like all superpowers become weaknesses at some point, and at its extreme, that becomes a weakness. You know, when you think you're still in a speedboat, and the guys are in the rings behind you, and you're changing direction every 2 minutes, and it goes from being fun to everyone's being sick.
Right.
That's the piece to sort of be more conscious of like consistency, communication. Start to think slightly longer term, give people more time to do things and go deeper, rather than on that superficial area you've been operating. I think it's really important.
Oh, mate, that's some amazing lessons throughout all this, and some fantastic stories throughout it as well. So if people wanted to find out more or get in touch, what would be the best way to find out more about what you do, or maybe around the Scotland piece as well?
Probably LinkedIn's easiest.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'm the only Shane Corstorphine on LinkedIn.
Right.
So that would be I think that'd be the best way to find me. But Paul, look, I really appreciate you hosting me, and you know, congrats to you as well on the fantastic journey you're doing. I'm loving these podcasts that you're doing as well. So absolutely brilliant, and helping loads of businesses. So thank you, and well done to you.
Well, really appreciate that, Shane, and I'm sure we'll be catching up and chatting again soon. But for the meantime, thanks for being an awesome guest on the show, Shane Corstorphine.
No problem. Thanks again.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.